Yo, welcome back to the greatest motherfucking podcast in the universe. This whole shit is going to be sporadic and improv because Leslie be predicting my shit. Let me go, Kevin. This is Vince. This is Leslie. Leslie's in Hawaii. Vince is in California. I'm in Floribama. What's really good?
Wait, what was the word you used? Leslie be what and shit?
Oh, Leslie and Vince be, I think it said predicting or like predicting my shit.
Bars.
Yeah. And we three beige friends who do a podcast. Yeah.
Yes, beige.
And 30's the new 20. Yeah.
Better.
On that note.
This is the last full regular episode of season 2.
We might have something special in the works for a bonus episode, but
yeah,
it's
maybe.
a huge
We'll
secret.
see.
It's super juicy.
Yeah, you'll never guess. We're recording this in mid-May 2021, and we did want to start the episode by just saying Free Palestine and just kind of acknowledging like our brothers and sisters across the sea who are engaged in the same struggle that, I personally have learned a lot more about this past year of just essentially like resisting like the brutality of colonialism and really resisting the way that like media forces shape narratives, which always is the thing, but it's so stark in this instance. And I'll just say like my short piece that if you're wondering what's going on or not clear, you can always DM us, and like I at least can share with like the resources that have been helpful for me in learning more of the nuance here. But it just has been particularly resonant in my desire to try to find the ways that I can stand in solidarity with Palestine this week, because just coming here and living in Hawaii, as I've mentioned before, like it really did open up my eyes to having more of a visceral understanding of the effects of colonialism and what it means to have your land taken. And that's what I'll share on that.
Honestly, I don't even know what I can add to that. Let's retweet all of that. Just like solidarity, obviously, with the Palestinian people, as well as everyone in the region that isn't in power but has to deal with the downstream impact of settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and just general instability. But yeah, my heart's definitely been really heavy the past couple of days. But yeah, solidarity. I will say I've been excited to see our peoples, so like our demographic. I think just after the past year, we all are with the shits at this point. So it's been really cool to see the displays of solidarity. But yeah, I know saying this doesn't really do but so much, and perhaps we'll drop some resources in the description, something that's a bit more actionable.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Free Palestine.
Kevo, do you have anything you wanted to verbalize?
Man, this one is difficult for me. I won't say why necessarily. I don't want to divulge too much, but I have done research on, like, when I say research, I've watched a documentary from a Palestinian perspective on the Israeli.
Ooh, which one?
I can't remember the name. I'll try to be vague in how I say this. I was in school at the time, and for one of my projects, we just went to a library, and I literally just grabbed like an old like DVD and just like popped in my laptop and watched it. But it's like a very homemade style, like interview style, documentary style. And I wish I remember the name. And then beyond that, like have talked to several people about just that, the history behind it and how it's viewed from both perspectives. So it's difficult for me because like I don't like the Palestinians. Arab people as a people are very resilient. Hence fucking war been going on for 25. Anyway, but the Palestinians are like so resilient as a people amongst Saudi, Moroccan, Syrian, Lebanese, Jordanian, Iraqi, Egyptian. They're so, because they're one of the few ones that have that unique situation of an occupation in their land, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Palestine, whether it's, sharing Jerusalem. And I've kind of watched them from a distance, whether it's through social media, through like different protests and bombings and missiles launched and suicide bombings and articles and I will say, like, in like a marginal piece of light amidst what was going on in terms of what I was researching was this, that there are persons on the Palestinian end of things and on the Israeli end of things who, if you're Palestinian or you're Israeli and you're about to get mad at what I'm going to say, I don't apologize, but I empathize with you if you don't like what I'm about to say. There were Palestinian people and Israeli people who kind of look at the situation and go like, yes, shit is fucked up, but one of the proposed alternatives right now is to like try to figure out a way to live together peacefully, whatever that looks like. I mean, and they in the video or the article that I was watching, it wasn't like politically or by terms of government, by terms of land ownership. It was just like us as a people who aren't involved in government or politics or ownership of land, as authorities or like these big governmental entities, as everyday people who work everyday jobs. Like, man, this like hatred and unforgiveness and all this shit, like not to let go of our identity and our resilience and the history of what happened to us as a people on the Palestinian side. But like we just have to, someone has to begin to make an effort. There has to be an effort made for us to live and coexist peacefully in spite of how shit is fucked up. And I'm not saying like there's a political and a governmental proposal to like this idea of, I forgot what the style of government is called, but it's basically proposing this idea of them coexisting politically and land being distributed a certain way and XYZ. And I'm not saying that that's what I agree with. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, it should be like this distribution, or it should be all given back, or it should be all held by this party or that party. Because man, it's beyond my heartbreak for the Palestinians, and I don't really know much from the Israeli perspective. Beyond my heartbreak for the Palestinians, I just want, I can empathize with the idea of your soul being crushed because you yearn for something. That human experience of you're sick in your heart because you've desperately yearned, your heritage and your generations, or just you as a person, have yearned for so long for the resolution of something or the resolve of something, and not being able to see it come to pass, and that making your physical, mental, emotional person sick and downtrodden. Not to the extent that the Palestinians experience it, but I can resonate with the idea of getting sick at heart because you don't have resolve in the things that most frustrate you. I just look at them and I have, my heart breaks, and I look and I go, they have. And if you're Israeli and you're listening to this and you get upset with me, I understand. I'm just not even going to try to defend. I'm not going to apologize, but I understand. The level of angst that I feel when I saw through different means of media, written, video, articles, documentaries, and then firsthand accounts of Palestinians, of what the Palestinians are going through. It's the kind of angst that takes the floor out from under you. And I'm not going to compare it to cancer, but when I hear cancer survival victims like my old boss and my old job talk about getting the news of cancer or terminal illness, or hearing about a parent who lost a child, which we all mean that expression, a parent shouldn't have to bury their child. Me trying to empathize in those moments and connect emotionally to trying to imagine What would it be like if you were that parent losing a child? What would it be like if you got told you had cancer? What would it be like if the phone rings one day and it's dad or your brother saying mom died? And I try to put myself into that emotional state of how the bottom would fall out and how nothing would matter and how there would literally be no hope. And there's nothing in the American experience I can compare the Palestinian experience to, even with the black and white. Like we as Americans don't walk around worried that a fucking missile is gonna like hit my house right now. Like you'll see documentary of like 5-year-old girls, and this is in one of the documentaries I watched, who was like, she was like, man, like we as a people are like a lion and we'll never stop fighting for our justice. And it's like, man, the perspective of a 5-year-old looking at something like a government saying, we're going to fight them like a lion. You'll never defeat us. You'll never take away our fight. So for me to try to think about their shoes and to try to imagine like, no, Kevin, whatever level of the bottom coming out from underneath you, whether it's cancer or the passing of your parent, still doesn't equate to then know or try to imagine how helpless I would feel, and then to look up and to not see a defeated people, but to see a people who are like, man, they have fucking tenacity and they have a fight. Like there's a fighting, like when Vince says with the shits, like fuck what China's going through, fuck what we went through last year. Like how many like the level of violence, the type, like just the shit the loss of life you see in that region of Palestinians. And there's, again, if you're Israeli, I understand that there's instances where Palestinian bombers, I get it. Like it's loss of life on both sides. But again, me just having the focus on the Palestinian end and looking and going, I would be defeated and like kind of raise the white flag. It feels like that's what I would do. And to look up and to see like to see you dehydrated, depleted, lack of energy, how are you still fight? Like this isn't humanly possible. I can't wrap my mind around an ultra marathon runner, which is over 100 miles. If they haven't drinking water for months on end or weeks on end or hours on end, they're running it. It's like, how are you still go? I don't get. So man, it's talk about perplexed. Talk about a level of emotion where we talk about words aren't the language of thought. There's nothing I've ever seen in the American experience that correlates to the level of perplexity and angst I feel when I see the Palestinian experience. So I feel even a sense of shame talking about it, because I think of a Palestinian hearing me talk about it and them being offended that the idea that these Americans, like, if I was a Palestinian, and me just being judgmental, if I was a Palestinian, I would go, there should be no speech. There should be days of silence. Like there should be such a gravity. Like there's a person in the Bible whose life gets fucked up and then his friends come sit with him for 7 days. And literally the Bible says they sat there for like, I think a week and they just sat there and mourned with him in silence for
Job.
Yeah. And so when I think of Palestinians, I think of that level of like, I think if an American mindset understood the Palestinian struggle truly, you wouldn't have the ability to say anything. There would literally be silence, and I don't know how long but the gravity of the issue. So yeah, no, stand in solidarity, and not that it means anything coming from 3 American mouths, but to look over the way, to kind of glance over the fence, and to have a glimpse of an idea of what's going on, at least to the extent of just understanding. Every human understands to some extent death, or at least the fear of death or losing a loved one. To see that and to not see a defeated people, but to see people who have a warrior spirit and are resilient and persistent. Yeah. So stand in solidarity, and it's it's amazing is a very crude word. It's not, it's amazing isn't, the words aren't enough to say what it does to my person to look over and see someone fighting for something in those circumstances. So yeah, stand in solidarity, and I'll just leave it at that and leave silence, because that's like the gravity it lays on me.
So well said. And I almost want to add to it, but I also agree that it almost feels out of, like, there's no couth for people that sit in the American empire specifically that is complicit with the status quo of the conflict to like talk about how inspiring it is. But I think that's beautifully said, Kevin. There's this documentary that Abby Martin did a couple years ago that she and she's probably one of the forefront journalists covering the conflict, specifically the conditions in Palestine. And she took it out of a paywall given what was going on this week. And it was about the march in 2018. And this went on for like a year in Gaza. And to see them go out literally every day, and then it turned into, I think, every Friday, going out, they weren't armed. Like, they're, again, loss of life is bad. So I'm not going to say that there's never been any loss of Israeli life. But in the context of the conflict, one is extremely militarized. Like, it's asymmetrical. But they would still go out with fucking rocks. And the IDF would be sniping them, not just like normal protesters that are at the gate protesting, but sniping medics, disabled people, children, journalists, explicitly like 300 meters away. And they would still go out every Friday just to protest and throw rocks as like a symbol of their protest. Yeah, I think inspiring almost seems like cartoonishly insufficient to describe. Exactly. But it definitely, I mean, my heart's been heavy, but I appreciate you saying that, because I think it does also point to, at least there's points of inspiration to pull from, because I can't imagine doing that consistently. Like, we protested all last year, and we're, I mean, not that we were scared for our lives necessarily, but can you imagine doing that and then knowing that consistently people are going to die? This isn't a fair fight. Like, it's just a protest. I don't know. Again, I feel almost
and
icky
not just like
abstract,
like people in your community, like people, like your family,
you
might lose your home.
Your
might be
your children.
Yeah. Ugh.
So yes, so we will include some links that have been helpful for us. I'm probably, like, honestly the least educated, so we'll all huddle together and combine what we know and share some resources. So for our main conversation today, we were going to talk about the idea of surprise. And full disclosure, I had tried to kind of set up a structure and was having some difficulty. So I ended up just going with a little, like, Vincent called it a thought experiment, which I was like, oh yeah, I guess it kind of is. Like, it's framing it that way. A little thought experiment that I had written a few weeks prior. And we're just going to kind of bounce off of like how we react to it and see where it takes us. So the thought experiment I had written down was you get used to it. Think of anything you get used to, touching your eye to put in context. I put XX because I was like, the point of this isn't the examples, okay? I don't need to spend the energy to think of two other examples. You can fill in the
deletes all my notes.
And then I said, you get used to it. Now imagine a world where you've gotten used to the all the it's already, as far as the limit of what you can get used to. What would remain shocking? And so I would love to hear from both of you guys first. Like, I wrote down a few questions about the question. But just like before we go into that, how did you guys read this? Because that's the first thing, right? Is like, it's not a straightforward, like, well, what's your answer? It's like, I feel like the first thing is like, well, how do you even respond to the little bubble that it creates? Like, where does your mind go first? Like, it could, this well,
Kevin started showing his thigh, so I figured he wants to go first.
He's
pulling his shorts up.
He's just copying my classic.
Oh, y'all are nasty. I know we want followers, but
Um, Clarifying question: do we associate surprise with shock?
Ooh, that's a good point, because another thing I did write shock. Yeah, in here we can treat surprise as functioning as a cousin of shock, where shock probably carries more like intense association.
And thank you, because the reason I ask is I associate surprise with positive emotion, whereas shock can be, I think, not necessarily neutral, but shock has an undertone of like maybe either neutral or negative, or like I think the antithesis of surprise could be like fear, like a sensation of extreme fear in shock, like a jump in a movie. So it's like there's a similarity in sensation of a jump scare movie in that moment, and then like this surprise, like a surprise party, and you're genuinely surprised. That's why I wanted to ask between shock and surprise. Are we talking about surprise in the context of a positive experience?
Well, there we go. You just answered my question. So where you went first was trying to be like, wait, does this feel like I'm figuring out something positive or something negative, which I think is very interesting, and I'll comment on it. But Vincent, where did you go first?
It took me a while to go somewhere, but I think I landed more in the context of like novelty surprise and like stale versus novel. Um, like taking the thought experiment and putting myself in it, I was thinking like get used to it, as in everything just was very stale, and like where would I get novelty from at that point?
Mm. That's so interesting. Like the first question about the question that I wrote was, does it feel positive or negative to you, and why? So it's really cool that that was the first place, because I felt like when I wrote it, to me, it felt simultaneously utopic and dystopic. Like you can see how when you think about this idea of like getting used to things, okay, it carries two things, right? It asks you to imagine that you've gotten used to everything that you can as a human get used to, and like you as the person that you are, because like different people probably have different capacities for that. So like that's the first thing. And then second, it asks you to think about like once you hit that limit, what would still be in the category of like what could surprise or shock you, which in the way I meant it, back to Kevin's point, was not making a big differentiation like between surprise and shock. It was just shock being like the most intense version of surprise. And yeah, I just oh god, we were doing a team, we were forming coherent thoughts. Hold on, let me grab it back. I know how to pull it back together. So yeah, you could imagine it like shocking in a good way, like the idea of, oh, novelty's good, but then it could be very dystopic feeling in the idea of like, well, is there a limit, basically? Like, could humans just get so used to everything theoretically that we like lose our ability to be surprised? And I don't know. I don't feel like I'm doing a good job explaining it, but I feel like when you get to like, what if we lose the ability to be surprised? It's almost like this feeling of like we could either be surprised by everything or surprised by nothing. And it feels like it has this dual nature of like, could have utopia vibes, could have dystopia vibes. Does that make sense? Just that general like wash of color. Yeah. So where was kind of going with it was like, well, I started off in one place, and then my brain was just like, it oozed out the idea and it was dripping into like every bucket of things that I've been thinking about. And that's when I was like giving up and like, I can't make any kind of structure. Like, this is going to be a bad conversation. But where it started was the idea of actually like tenderness. And I was thinking about how, again, this is just one tiny little offshoot road of like where you could take it. But I was thinking about, for me, I tend to not be surprised by things that I think surprise a lot of people. Like more external type things. But then
you tend to not be surprised by those things.
I think so. It's weird because it depends on how you look at it. Like I could easily see if somebody knows certain parts of me and sees me in certain contexts, they'd be like, "What? No, like you do. You have the you." But I don't feel like I do in the true sense of the word. But it's like little tenderness and kindness and like that little things, those feelings, like however they come, those always surprise me. And I was thinking about how it's not because, oh, they're so rare that it's like it's shocking when it happens. It's more like something about the nature of like a tender and like a really kind and soft feeling begets more sensitivity to it for me rather than less. So like, things that you get used to, you would associate with like repeated exposure, so like if you've experienced something 50 times, maybe you start to like lose your sensitivity to it. You get used to it, right? It doesn't feel novel. It doesn't feel surprising or shocking. And I was just thinking about, for me, like things in that arena, it seems to be the case. It's like they remain maybe not novel, but the sensitivity factor of embedded within what it means to be surprised by something only kind of like increases. Like I'm more appreciative. I'm more like, oh, like I feel it, and not every single time someone does something nice, but yeah, I was just thinking like that's kind of a beautiful little side thing about it, like there's, and then really just to end like my initial area I was with it, I was just thinking about what kinds of things then would I want to make sure that I continue to be surprised by? Like, what do I not want to get used to? And then is there anything in the category of what I do want to get used to? And like why? So, because, if you start on the thought experiment of like, where's my limit of what I get used to? For me at least, you kind of realize, in the same way, can we really conceptualize the difference between like a billion and a trillion? Can you really separate out the level of, without conscious effort, used to-ness that we already have with like so much of our daily experiences from then like what our limit would be? It really made me think like I'm already like, for a lot of intensive purposes, so used to so many things without having done a lot of effort to consider like, well, how much of this do I want to be used to? And then if there are things that I'd rather like cultivate more sensitivity toward, like what kinds of changes internally and externally would I need to make? And that's where then it began to be way too, like it was floating off into like a billion different buckets, but that was the general starting point. Does that overlap with some of where you guys started after your initial points?
Slightly.
What part overlapped?
The part about I'm trying to map out for me moments that surprised me, and then thinking now, could those moments, so maybe I create 6 moments that I know in life have surprised me. Then I parse out for each one, for each 6, would this still surprise me? If yes, why? If this one, no, then why? Then when I got to the no, then why, the no, then why was the overexposure. And the if yes, then why, it was like, oh yeah, it's because it's so rare and novel that you haven't oversaturated your facilities with that moment. And yeah, so that idea of familiarity with exposure, and how familiarity and exposure play a part in what does still surprise you.
Are there any instances, or how do you feel about what I said about like categories that actually the familiarity doesn't cause desensitization? Like, did that feel like, oh yeah, I could think of some examples? Or is it like you would need to think through and find some?
No, when you said it, it makes sense as a proposition. I can't think of one area where it's applicable. in my life. For me,
Oh,
yeah,
I see.
I struggle to think, because then relative to how many times that thing has happened, it's like, oh no, this would always still, like, kindness because if I were to map back to my 3-year-old self,
Hello, Kevin.
How kindness felt to 3-year-old Kevin, yeah, the sensations were just so much more vibrant. So I can't think of anything that, no matter how, novel it is, like kindness, I can't. Again, the proposition makes sense that there are these things that no matter how many times you experience them, they're always still surprising or begetting of a level of emotive response out of you that feels novel. However, I again, I struggle to find an example. I can't produce an example.
What about but real quick, I have a quick follow-up. I really want to hear Vince's thoughts too, but what about I feel like every time I hear you talk about why you love hip hop, I hear something in your voice that to me would mean it hasn't lost the way it surprises you. And the part of surprise we're talking about that is more just that sensitivity to it's not stale. So does that maybe feel like something within the arts, or when you experience a poem that's made in a way that you're like, oh my God, this to me, do you think that would fall maybe in that category?
So that when I did the experiment in my head, that's what I tried. That's what I think I arrived to at one point. However, the only issue was, if I compare this to, let's say, you have Tylenol, then you have the shit that an IV of you have Tylenol, then you have Percocet, then you have the shit they would hook you on at the hospital, which having an arm broken, having a stick go through my foot, thank you, Vince, having my teeth pulled, having my molars pulled out. So with hip hop, the way hip hop surprised 11-year-old Kevin, the problem when I try to ask myself, less like that, you're right. It still surprises you at 29 the way it surprised you at 11. And then I go, man, the way the art form evolved. So with coffee, you go from or maybe tea. Let's say you drink a 40 milligram thing of tea of caffeine, and it's and then you drink a 90 milligram cup of coffee, and you go, yeah, man, caffeine is still. And then you get a 300 milligram thing of energy drink, and you go, but it's the stakes are always raised on the end of the facilitator that is surprising me. The stakes are evolved and raised and are strengthened. So if I at 29-year-old were to be re-exposed to the thing that first surprised me at 11 years old, I think I would be so dulled, because I've been so oversaturated with an ever-evolving level of intensity that if you were to go back to the 40 milligram of surprise at 11 years old for hip hop, it wouldn't be as. So it's like this sick drug thing, right? Where you're always chasing that first high. But it's this ever growing monster. But again, I still agree with your notion that that's just in my frame of reference. In some way,
that's beautiful. Yeah, I get it.
I agree with your notion. I can't fully articulate why, but I do agree with the notion that there is this level of thing of surprise and kindness and sensitivity that kind of, for however way it does it, it preserves its nature of novelty and about it.
Yeah.
Just kind of responding, it might not necessarily be what you guys were just saying. But I like where we're going with the idea of novelty, because when you sent me the thought experiment, it was actually really hard for me to think of me being surprised, but surprised in the sense of jaw drop, shock. And all the examples I thought of, I was like, damn, these are really lame, because they're more of me having expectations that were slightly off, and people doing something that was slightly different than I expected, which is a lame.
What? Give one example.
Well, one example I thought of was my one of my first real jobs when I initially asked for a raise and promotion, and I was stressing about it for weeks, and I just got it like, yeah, totally. And I was like, oh, that's it. And then I was like, damn, I should ask for more money because that was too easy.
It's a bad kind of surprise. Shit.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. Hell yeah. Or like another time that was also work related. I thought I was about to get like chewed out for not closing a candidate. And then my boss put a meeting on my calendar for the next day. And I was stressing. And then I sat down and the meeting was her apologizing to me for not supporting me. And again, I was like, oh, okay.
My heart.
Totally. But I feel like these are all like examples of, again, just like having mixed maxed expectations. But I think the question of like losing novelty is a bit different. And I think it does push me to start thinking about things like art and music specifically, and a lot of a novel experiences specifically in the context of live music and shows, and going to like a lot of weird different like sketchy warehouse shows in the hood in a like a literal attic. I'm thinking of one in particular, but like going to like these like novel experiences and like getting like a rush of like, oh, this is like weird music that I've never heard before. This is like a cool environment. And that definitely gives me like a novelty dopamine push. But going back to my more boring,
novelty is definitely different than just like an instance of like being surprised in your day-to-day. There's overlap, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead though.
Well, I thought it was interesting too, going back to like the other, like the actual idea of being surprised, and you talking about if nothing is novel, so does that mean you're going to be surprised by nothing, or does that instead mean you'll be surprised by everything? Exactly. Which is interesting and kind of like something that I need to chew on for myself, because it almost feels like self-condemning if I don't feel like I'm ever surprised. Like, am I just digesting it in the context of nothing actually surprises me, as opposed to the theoretical ability to digest it as everything should be surprising me? I think that's kind of a challenging path to go down with the thought experiment. Because my initial thought is like, well, if nothing's novel, then I get what you're saying in theory, but no, nothing's going to surprise you. But then like, if you push it further, if nothing is, I don't know. Like
exactly. When you try to put the words, it gets a little tangly feeling, but see, I feel like, yeah. Well, this kind of was also birthed from something that I wrote years ago that I've been revisiting as I've kind of been working on like a new piece of writing, because I kind of wanted to be in conversation with this older piece of writing. And in that older one, I had written these lines that said something like, I've always said I'm a person who's like difficult to surprise, something like that. And then I said, I guess being open to surprise is in essence being the same as like being difficult to surprise. So it's like ironic, because it's like I feel like I'm very open to surprise, which would seem to indicate if you're open to surprise, it means like you expect to be surprised, meaning like you have a sensitivity, like you understand like the world is a surprising place. But then if you are open to surprise, then when it comes, because you're so open to it, it maybe doesn't actually have the effect of surprising you. But maybe the problem here is that it comes back to an idea from quantum physics, which is that they seem to be opposing ideas, but maybe they're actually not. Like, you know, like maybe being constantly surprised, but expecting to be constantly surprised is the same. It's just about how you frame it, I suppose, and like how are we even thinking about what it means to be surprised? Like if the goal is to be like, oh, like your jaw drops and you is it just the feelings? Is it the idea of understanding that you have a limited conception, so therefore, like, of course things would be surprising because you haven't accounted for everything in every situation. What do you guys think about that idea, like, of it kind of like they seem to oppose, but maybe they actually don't? Maybe they only seem to oppose when we try to put it into words and into this space that we are.
I hear you kind of, but I also feel like I'm having a hard time putting into words. Like I'm there with you, but I don't know. My mouth isn't catching up. I feel like I don't actually like this, but I feel like the best I could do is it's the same lens, like flipped over. So it is the same thing. Like both the concept of like always being surprised and never being surprised. It's the same thing, just like flipped over. And when you look at something, you flip over, and that's the lens in which you would always be surprised, and vice versa. I feel like that's very insufficient. But I hear you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Kevin, how do you feel about this?
You know, so the analogy that I'm going to use is that bone in your knee that the doctors hit to make it react. And how they tell you that, and this is a very crude analogy because the physical aspect of a body reacting to something compared to the chemistry of a human mind. Anyway, so they tell you can't look at it and think about it because like when you're actively focusing on it, then it won't react the way it's supposed to. They're trying to check your reflexes. So when I think about the idea, it's almost like it's almost like a Jedi mind trick. And
which one is like a jet? The knee thing?
Your analogy of it being this like the same thing where they like basically being open to surprise, does it in fact actually work for itself to where it makes you more susceptible to surprise, or does it work against itself to where it makes it difficult to surprise? I think it's like a Jedi mind trick. And the way I'll explain this is, if someone has a disposition, like I think if someone has to think about it that way and articulates it that way, my theory is they are very difficult to surprise. But if us three were to look at someone outside of this conversation and go, man, just like their disposition in life, like who they are as a person, like they love surprise and they're open to it, and they're very like their energy is very receptive to it. That is like, yeah, that works for them. But I think the person, which just speaks to how cynical you guys are, I think when the person is actually analytically analyzing, like, does it make it's like
oh God, you're so right.
We want to be surprised so bad. We're trying to fucking psychoanalyze.
That's pretty good.
I could be wrong. That's just my theory.
That's interesting. That's something to think about.
I feel like that's true. It's kind of like people that like laughing primes you to laugh. So like if you watch something funny and then you go to like a stand-up show, you're more likely to laugh just because like you're primed to laugh. And I'm sure like you can be primed for surprises, and here comes cynical old me crawling around. No one's gonna fucking surprise me today. And it's like, well, yeah, of course no one surprised you today.
But imagine the alternative of it'd be weird, right? For someone to wake up and go, I'm gonna get surprised today. And they're like it's like,
yeah. Yeah. But that's not exactly what I was saying by being open to surprise. Okay. You guys are one turning into these nasty little images.
Wow. Did you hear Leslie say the image of me is nasty?
Yeah.
Crawling around and use
that's
like
my natural mode of transportation.
Does it sound nice to you for you guys for certain things to lose their shock value or surprise factor? And if so, like what things? Like what things do you wish you just would get used to that you're not used to? You know, that's kind of embedded in there too, which was hard for me to think about, which might just be because I'm tired, but it was literally like, you know, when you start to think about something and it's just like you just decide you don't have the energy.
Yes, often.
Leslie's sound effect and visual was the perfect representation of what happens in your head.
Okay.
I mean, shout out to our receiving love. I think it'd be nice to not ever be surprised to, and obviously surprise doesn't have to mean appreciation, but like there's like a sense of surprise as in like
do I
receiving
deserve this?
authentic
Why?
substantive
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
This actually is directly back to what we're talking about, because like I said, love is definitely in that category of like that tenderness and that kindness. And like I was talking about how the sensitivity part of the surprise to me like doesn't wane. So that's like the good. But then you're saying, oh God, now I'm losing it again. But it makes sense, right? How it's kind of the same thing. Like we want to not be surprised by it, but love would also be one of those things we always want to be surprised by, in the sense of the portion of surprise that is like sensitivity. Like not, it both shouldn't be novel, but it should be novel in the sense of how we react to it, which is like we don't want to be desensitized to it, but we want to be used to it. We want to be used to it without being desensitized to it. And we want the more we receive to increase the amount that we would want to receive and give, rather than a lot of things where like once we've had a certain amount, we're like, well, we're kind of tired of that. Like it doesn't hit as much. We don't want to do. There it is. Oh my God. Love is always the answer. Look at this. Love is the thing that makes it make sense. Yes. All right. Season 2. That's right.
Wait, that's how we started and that's how we fucking end. There we go.
Wait, but that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, because I'll use the two words. The idea is in the love case of love, it makes sense. You want to be open but be sensitive too. So
it should be normal, but it shouldn't be normal. Like it shouldn't be desensitized normal.
Yeah, so it should be not necessarily expected.
The more should be the more instead of the sorry.
You're right. It shouldn't be expected, but it should be a normative pattern. Like you should have a circuitry in your brain that allows for you to, like, when that wave or that gust of wind of love metaphorically hits you, like you have lungs to breathe in with and receive it and let it process through your blood cells in your system and fill your red blood cells. But at the same time, you don't want to be so like oversaturated or callous to it that it's like you've gotten it so much that it's like now it's commonplace. It's like like I'm not excited. It's like, man, you want to be functional and adjusted enough as a human being that when someone does that for you, you respond healthily, because you're actually you're giving them something by letting them give you love. At the same time, man, what sad day it is when you wake up and you do receive and you go, oh, and you do reciprocate a level of like thankfulness for it, but deep down inside, like it kind of just feels common. You're like, like you're kind of unenthused, you're not excited, and it doesn't have the same kick or like vibrancy you once felt about it.
Wow.
I just can't believe
we got there, y'all. Like, this feels like a discovery. Go ahead, Vincent. I'm curious what you're thinking.
No, I was just still going down the pathway of receiving love and not being surprised, and actually thinking like there is a continuing sense of surprise when like love begets deeper love or like more meaningful love, like an evolution of the love that grows or also just like adapts to individual to individual. And in that sense, it shouldn't be like there is that continuing novelty to it. There is that continuing shock value of, I mean, in theory, this is also me just shooting my shot and pitching it out there, to the people listening. I think there's like a challenge in pursuing the surprise, not for the sake of the surprise in itself, but like just that deeper sense of love. And I think there's probably examples that aren't just love, where it like kind of begets itself to become deeper and draw you in.
Let me propose the idea. So a baby, like there's a term or a phrase that goes for kicks and giggles. So for a baby, like they know, like,
is it for kicks and giggles or for shits and giggles?
I've never heard kicks.
For kicks and
I
giggles.
thought it was shits and
That's the PG version.
Y'all R-rated it because when you tickle a baby, it kicks and giggles. So
it also sometimes shits when you tickle it.
But you're not trying to make the baby shit and giggle because then you ruin the experience.
I never knew it was attached to a baby. I thought it meant like anyway. Okay, that's not the point. So what about kicks?
Trying to make a grown adult shit and giggle?
I mean, maybe if they need
so
to.
hard that you shit. I thought
and
that
then
was
you
what
giggle.
It meant.
Okay. So
someone was at my apartment earlier and they were pooping and they were giggling in there. So maybe that's the example of shit. Sorry, go ahead.
Shout out bathroom poop giggler. No, but you know when you laugh, sometimes you pee a little. I just always thought shitting was the next evolution. You're like pushing the intensity. Like I want to make you shit and giggle.
We hope all of our followers have had shit and giggles at least once listening to this
Maybe.
podcast.
Maybe.
Sorry, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
Maybe you might. Okay, you guys are right. Shits and giggles. So when you do that whole peekaboo thing with the baby, right? Like because the baby doesn't have a large data or iCloud of experiences. So almost everything is like parents talk, like JoJo talks about the first time they give Enzo ice cream, the first time they give, and like it doesn't have a large database. So in some ways, like, man, the first time this kid falls in love, the first time this kid has ice cream, the first time this kid sees a movie that just article of clothing that make.
First time they see rain.
Right, yeah, like the sensation of or snow, like the first, or seeing the ocean for the like mountains for the first time. So my cynical proposition about why we get desensitized as a baby isn't sophisticated. Me and us three eating ice cream, us three could casually eat ice cream right now on this podcast, and it'd be like, and you might give baby like a baby some ice cream that's never had it tonight, and it just might have this like the biological sugar and sweetness, and then as we get older, I think the responsibility of the human being, we know we get more sophisticated and more advanced and involved in terms of just human interaction, in terms of how we grow and evolve, in terms of we understand that going from elementary, we don't understand this when we're in elementary school, but we understand that when we're in elementary school, looking back, the complexity of problems you deal with as a third grader is a far cry from the complexity of problems Vince deals with at his job yesterday. It's like Vince forgot to do his homework as a third grader.
Except, weren't you out yesterday from your second vaccine shot?
So
anyway.
Shout out to Mom Moderna.
Pulling in more relevant content.
So you get more complex because the problems in which you have to figure out in life get more complex. Therefore, your brain, your life, you as a person get more sophisticated. And the thing that a lot of us, I think, as a poet, punt on is we don't find ever evolving ways to love each other. So if everything else evolves and advances and matures, technology, clothing, cinema, art, but the ways in which we love each other are kind of just punted. Like if every time we go up there for art or clothing or cinema, and this fucking batter is like, I'm going to put it like fuck over the fence. I'm going to put this thing in another state. And we're finding ever more evolving ways to make an experience of something, whether it's food, any art, aesthetic experience, any problem solving. When fucking cars were invented, when airplanes were invented instead of ships. And it's like, oh my. And then we punt. So with surprise and the human experience, the most fundamental experience, it's because we know intuitively what it's going to take to now kindness, which is why I think Leslie's proposition is correct, because there's something just so raw and like bare nature about kindness that it still surprises and begets kindness. But with love, like when you have to live with someone every day, we punt on finding ever more evolving ways to love each other. And the rest of our personhood knows, because we've evolved in every other area of life, we know that there's something to be yearned for. It leaves us asking the way in which is not It's not to blame the other person, but the way in which other people love us sometimes can leave us wanting. And so when we don't, which is very difficult, because like, man, how the fuck do you innovate and evolve and grow and spark new ideas on how to love? But isn't that like, if someone did find a novel way, like if someone spent a year studying you and the details of you, and your surprise party wasn't just some generic thing, but like someone gives you a gift or someone gives you an encouraging word, and you feel seen, or you feel heard, or you feel known, and it just kind of pierces your heart in a different way of like, oh, there was thought, there was time, there was effort, there was intentionality. Like you paid attention, like you don't just, you see me. So I think in that aspect, I think in terms of love, we as a human race punt on finding ever more evolving ways to love each other. And that's why in terms of surprise and love, we know something's not right, because every other area and facet of life has evolved in that one to our detriment, because it's kind of awkward to do, right? It's awkward to put obligation on love, because we feel like love should just be free, when in fact there's no space in which a healthy relationship functions of love that there isn't obligation. But we punt on it, and so therefore it kind of just makes it like, man, I've seen this kind of love since I was 3, since I was 7, since I was 12. Like we yearn for the moments where not the romantic comedy romance, but like two platonic friends that do something for each other, that one does something for the other, and it kind of just makes the other one's heart melt. Like, oh, like, man, I appreciate you, as like that kind of,
like when you pretended to be Vincent's partner for that car insurance thing.
That is funny.
You told her?
I think we talked about it on one of our little trial runs, actually.
Oh my god.
Oh shit, yeah, maybe we did. I don't know. Vince would have to be but like for example, for me, it was when I was driving the first time I went to go visit Vince in LA, and we're driving back to the Airbnb, and it's late at night, and I know Vince loves to play music in his car and curate music, and it's the first time he ever did this. He passed me the aux cord, and there's memes about like getting past the aux, because it's like this, but
that is hilarious.
I told Vince it was one of the most like meaningful things for me in our friendship. Like it was so meaningful, and it melted my heart, and it was like this.
So cute.
It was huge, and it was like, man, this is like, so yeah. Like I don't like.
We need to pass the aux cord more.
Well, again, like
also, to give the audience the story that we brushed over, the TLDR is my car got towed, and I needed to borrow $1 to get it out. And Kevin came through with the coin, but in order for him to pay for it, I had to call with him. And then I didn't know if they would let him like pay for it. So we had to pretend like he was my partner. So Kevin pretended to be my sugar daddy because he's a real one.
Oh, yeah, that motherfucker. Like, I'm telling a person who owns a business, I am willing to pay something, and this motherfucker has the audacity to go, what's your relation to this club?
Oh yeah, I forgot they asked.
And I remember thinking to myself, you should be fired. Your business, I hope whoever you are, I hope in Corona your business shut down and all of your family starved and died. I hope every single one of your kids died of starvation. Like you
I was just happy that Kevin.
You're not a police officer. You don't get to ask me. I'm trying to give you money. You don't get to inquire about the nature of my relationship. And so like he was like, what's the nature of your relation? And we had this
He did basically say, who is you?
Yeah. And I was like, I'm his partner. And he was like, oh, yeah, I hope you and your family died of starvation.
Oh my god.
I'm glad that you got that off your chest. I'm glad. Sounds like that must have been festering for a couple of years. Do you guys? I was just thinking, because I think we're talking about love, and in that sense, like totally, I agree with Kevin about like the ways in which we need to pursue new forms of love, new intensity, and like the work that goes into that. Beyond love and just surprises in general, is it okay for someone to just not like surprises? Because I feel like surprise, it is in a way and like a loose sense part of the human experience, right? Of like not just as a child, but as an adult. Like this might be me prescribing like some purpose. So maybe someone wouldn't agree with this purpose, but I do think there's a sense of purpose as a human and wander and engaging with the world, the environment, the people around you. And I do think there's a piece of that, if there is purpose, that ties into like the purpose of our existence. But I'm guessing, I'm trying to imagine a situation where maybe someone just doesn't care about that. Just doesn't want to be surprised. Is that fair?
It's interesting you brought that up, because that's what I was thinking. That's where I was going from Kevin's extremely beautiful manifesto, by the way. Like, I need to chew on that. That you're so right. We've evolved so many areas of life, like accept how to love, and not just like one person loving another, but like as communities, as societies, as nations, like how to love each other. We've evolved. Our technology is taking us to go colonize Mars, before we've figured out, let alone love each other, like feed our communities. And
we can't even love
make sure
Earth,
we have
but
homes.
Mars, here we come.
But anyway, not that. But what I was thinking is, if you extend upon what Kevin's saying of, we haven't evolved the ways we love each other, then I was thinking, actually, yeah, to Vincent's point about surprise as an element of just what it means to engage with the world. I think you're right, because I mean, we know how much knowledge there is out there and how much we don't know. Not even just like straightforward knowledge, but like conceptual playgrounds for that knowledge. Like, we know how much we don't know. And if you continue to increase the amount and the ways that you engage with the people around you and the world that you're in, which, like, for me definitely does feel like, obviously you can't just always be, but over the course of life, like, I definitely want to continue increasing that and not grow stagnant. And it's like, if you're not being surprised, it probably means like you're not engaging at the levels that you could be engaging, because like that, because what is surprise? It's something we haven't thought of, or haven't, it's outside of our comfortable feeling conception of whatever the thing is. And to think that one little person walks around and goes through life not being surprised, which it's not exactly the answer to Vincent's question, but I do think, just bare bones, that just means you're not really engaging as much as you could be, because of course, if you engage even a bit past your comfort zone, like, you will be surprised, because it's not just the knowledge, it's the ways of looking at knowledge and all these other things. And just like people, like, not just loving people, but something I was recently thinking about is how shocking it is that I will probably in life, like, never meet even like one person from like half, let alone the majority of countries on earth, and like ways of living and cultures, and like how little I actually know about what it can mean to be human. Because like, yeah, did you say boo?
Yeah, boo. Just at the thought of that. No, I mean, I hear you, but boo at the thought of that.
Like, because my last thought is just tying back to our consistent theme of like, okay, translation of ideas and thoughts. And so I not only will I not get to have like firsthand experiences with even one person from like probably even half of like the countries in the world, the cultures in the world, the stories that I can access to learn about those ways of living are extremely, extremely translated containers, right? Because like we talked about how much translation even happens with one little person speaking to close friends, and then you take that and how it's been built in a culture. It's like, it's a beautiful type of storytelling when it gets to those broader levels, but we have to recognize how far removed it is from like each little individual life that has moved through time and evolved. It's just like, yeah, so I guess and I would say to Vincent's question, theoretically, I'm like, of course, if you don't like surprise, that's totally valid. It's valid not to like surprise, but I do think you probably have to accept that if you want to like learn in a way that requires you to move outside of your comfort zone, then like you will need to be surprised, even if you don't enjoy being surprised. Like you cannot like surprise, but like learning, and then accept surprise as a necessary evil of learning, I guess. if that's how you feel.
I mean, I feel like we just added everyone that's like, I don't like surprises, which
Not like I don't like birthday surprises, like not like that.
but I mean, it rings true. Like what they're really saying, it's not just like for the feeling of shock, but I think it's the feeling of being uncomfortable or experiencing things outside their bubble of accepted possible realities, which is fine, I think, if that's like the value system you have, or like just the choice that you make. But it is like forced limitedness.
I mean, I don't necessarily think if you don't like birthday surprises, that means that you generally across the board don't like things outside your comfort bubble, because like things like that are also then have like an interpersonal piece. It might mean certain areas, you know what I mean, like because there's comfort zone interpersonally, and then there's comfort zone, you know.
Let me be the mean one. It's okay to not like surprises, but if you don't like surprises, something in you is not okay.
Are any of us okay?
What I mean is, and me included. This is just my personal theory. Like this is in the framework in which I view the world, and I'm trying to think of all the instances in which I see this played out, whether it's in drama or in real life. This is my framework. You need therapy. I think I legitimately think something wrong happened so if you don't like being jolted, that's one thing. You don't like, because you scare easy. You don't like roller coasters. You don't like walking in, having people shot. But like if people don't like the sensation of surprise in relation to a birthday party or a surprise birthday party, because it triggers something. Like, why don't people like to receive love from other people? Because if you've been hurt in your life and you were at a place where you were able to receive love freely and abundantly, and then you got hurt, you don't ever want to be put back in a happy, loving position again to experience a peak that could then be co-reciprocated by a valley. I genuinely think and mind you, like you can see this in drama in Sherlock Holmes, people who are very over analytical, they're not surprised easily because they're so over analytical. Their mind can literally move so fast. It can anticipate in real time everything that might be a surprise. And so there are moments in the Sherlock Holmes where they display it, where he's able to be surprised. And it's these genuine moments of like, oh, this is so like shattering to the overarching narrative of this person that it feels so refreshing right now. But someone who's over analytical and just is never surprised, you can kind of, if it's not because if you can see the surprise moment set in, and they chose to not let it set in, they were chose to being like stoic. And they're like, I genuinely think your shit went wrong in dealing with people in life, and now you have emotional blockage. So it could be you're smart and you're arrogant and you're like, no, I'm never gonna let like people know or it could be you got hurt and so you're like, I don't ever want to let myself get back to a place where I can. Or it's like unforgiveness or I genuinely think now, if you like are very like sociopathic and it just doesn't register on your scale, that's a different thing. I'm not saying something's sure you're sociopathic, but it's like, if that's the case, if you genuinely don't register a sensation, that's one thing. If you register a sensation and then now there's defense being played inside of you, I'm curious where the defense is coming from and what the defense looks like. Is it arrogance? Is it unforgiveness? Is it emotional blockage? Is it what's happening when your garage doors and your blocks and your guards are going up? And that's just in my frame. Like in a lot of cases in which people can't be surprised because they're actually actively having to block, I think something is wrong.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, that's generally what I meant to when I think there's like a distrust of that uncomfortability. And I'm abstracting a little bit because I think this could apply to me personally in a lot of different cases.
I think that it is true, but it's not always true. And then sometimes that's only part of the story. I think sometimes that's most of the story, sometimes it's part. And I do think there's a section though where like, especially because there's a difference between, you said, somebody registering surprise and then choosing to like not engage with it, which probably more often than not does relate to some kind of like trauma or defense mechanism. But somebody who just like isn't comfortable with different kinds of surprises, I don't actually think always means like there's trauma or there's something wrong or they need to go to therapy. That's just a
Give me an example.
disposition. Like, I mean, not that I'm raising my, but obviously like enjoy learning. Like you know, I'm open to surprise. There's different areas where like I very much feel like I like my steady normal thing, and I do like get uncomfortable or displeasure if something throws that off. Now, more often than not, I'll end up like being grateful it happened because I'm like, oh, I learned something. But like, I still have that. And if someone doesn't happen to immediately go to that place of like I don't think there's something.
You're extending the framework of surprise outside of human to human experience. You might be talking about some serendipity happens in life that may not be attached to another human being that causes like a change or a shift that may be registered as surprise. Is that the case? Like you're saying in
Or with a person, like I'm just saying I think there's a difference between disposition and then assigning like you know, maybe mental health things or things that would require therapy or somebody's openness to like learning completely. I'm just saying like I think that's not always, there's just disposition, which you can choose how to interact with your disposition. Like I mentioned, like the really simple example of like someone who doesn't generally enjoy big surprises but very much enjoys learning, and so navigates that within their life where they recognize like, yeah, I'm always probably going to be grumpy if you spring last minute plans on me, like
okay,
you know, if we do one
yeah,
thing, you know. But
so let me clarify by saying that when I talk about surprise, and man, this kind of speaks to the low fidelity of us using the word, the low fidelity of the word surprise. So we have to find a better word, which in the time frame we have, we can't do it. So when I use the word surprise, it's a placeholder for a sensation that's always a positive emotion. I always attach it to like, I usually attach surprise. So we have to. So in that case,
I forgot that you did that. Yeah. That was my bad. You did say that right.
No, you're good. You're good. Because when you start to explain it in that sense, like when you talk about the person who springs at the last minute, like I resonate like, oh, I'll murder somebody. Yeah. I will kill you.
I remember when I was a wee lad, me and two people from the church we all met at went to another friend of ours place to drop him off a little cake for his birthday. And we showed up, didn't tell him in advance, and it's someone that you all know does not like surprises very well.
Oh so my god! I
showed up. Yeah. So we showed up.
It ain't name.
I don't think he'll care. It's Sam Hebel. So we showed up to his store with the cake. Happy birthday! And he was like, "Oh, thank you." And then he looked at the cake, looked for our parents because we weren't driving in. He's like, "Did you guys get dropped off?" And we're like, "Yeah, happy birthday." He was like, "Oh, okay, come in." And at the time, I feel like I didn't even think that would be a possibility. But now, PSA, don't ever show up to my apartment without telling me ahead of time. Don't ever do that. Ever. Just kidding. I mean, I'm not really kidding, but it's definitely not ideal. But it's just funny to think about the context of surprise.
Back to the point of like ending up finding a way to navigate it where it's like you end up being grateful or glad these things happen. If that happened and it was really awkward and uncomfortable, but it was like with like us or something, wouldn't it?
And he was grateful afterwards. It ended up being a good time.
Yeah, because then you'd be like, wow, well, this was an out of the ordinary experience with people I already love and trust, and like,
it ended up being great. Yeah. But that 10 seconds of literally, I can still picture him like looking at the cake at us and then looking for like my mom or something and be like, did you get dropped off? But yeah, to your point, like we for a while, it was a good time.
Okay, so ending notes. Last time you guys were happily surprised, or just a favorite surprise memory that you have?
I gave my two lame ones. The other ones I could think of were like TV show situations, like Game of Thrones Red Wedding or like Ozark Deaths.
I've been surprised a lot lately, but like actually by the same thing Vincent mentioned when you were talking about realizing it was based on your own like expectations or like limited frameworks for how things could go. I've been surprised by like my limited frameworks for how people can be or how things can go, or like, you know, so I don't have any, they're not clear, stark examples. It's a little more watery where it's like this general, you know, like I'm like, oh, Kevin,
Oh, yeah.
save the day by giving a good one.
No, so when I was thinking about that, I was coming up with like a lot of stories that match your guys. Is like it's this anti surprise. It's like you thought you were gonna like, and it was just kind of was underwhelming. What else? So the one moment that was genuine surprise, I was host. We were in COVID, so we were doing online services. So for Man of Church West Florida, I was hosting. Chris was having me host. And he was having me run the show. Like it's a very like this whole big thing. And for me, mental preparation and all this having to be the speaking guy and the social guy. And I was moving through this cafe that we were shooting in. We had a small live audience and like and Chris stopped. I mean, it's live, Facebook Live, a sermon, like hundreds of people. And it was my birthday. I didn't tell him it was my birthday because I don't like telling people when it's my birthday, which is a therapy thing. And Chris stops me. He's in the audience and I'm running the show for this part. He stops me with cameras running, Facebook Live, like we have a time, and he goes, is it your birthday today? And like just grab me in front of everyone. Hey, it's Kevin Ortiz. Hey. And in so many ways, my and Chris's relationship is like uncle, nephew, older brother, younger brother, father, prodigal son. And for him to be who he is, wife, family, kids, church, minister, like for him, it didn't feel like a check the box. The energy reciprocate. The energy felt on my end was like, it felt like a father who cared about his son, who like took that moment and said, these cameras don't matter. This audience doesn't matter. I love this kid. He tried to slide by without letting anyone know. I'm going to like, let me be a moment of, hey, just to remind, we like people love. And it like I face turned red, flushed. I was like, but it was a genuine sensation of like receiving love. And thankfully, like we had to keep the show running. So I didn't have to sit there awkwardly in that moment. But I remember thinking to myself, like, it was one of the greatest downloads of like, it felt like a fresh, authentic, like USDA approved. That's love. Like no ulterior motive.
Is that like, the highest you can think of? That's a good
we love certified fresh.
Recent, I'm sure I could dig back to different moments of like.
No, I meant USDA. I was kidding. I didn't mean that. I wasn't trying to downplay.
Wow, after that story, that's the best you could think.
It was not. It was OnlyFans approved. Instagram blue check mark, Twitter blue check mark, certified. The best you can. Yo, Leslie has a history of shitting on Vince's appetizers, shitting on Mayan. Yo, Leslie comes in.
No, not ending the season Leslie on this. You know what? Well, on that note, thank you for listening to the Bottomless Podcast Season 2. And you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, and
YouTube,
iTunes,
Apple Podcasts, Twitter.
All right. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you later. Maybe for a bonus ending episode. Maybe we'll see.
Maybe.